You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates. Sarah Gulseth will be back with us soon. Thanks to Concordia University, Wisconsin for supporting The Coffee Hour. Find out more about Concordia University, Wisconsin at cuw.edu. Live Uncommon. Upcoming very soon is the Gateway Creation Conference here in the St. Louis area. And joining us today, Dr. Danny Faulkner. He holds a Master of Science in Physics from Clemson University and a Master of Arts and a PhD in Astronomy from Indiana University. And he's now an author, speaker, researcher for Answers in Genesis, and one of the presenters at the upcoming Gateway Creation Conference. Dr. Faulkner, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, that's my pleasure.
It's great to have you back on the Coffee Hour again to talk about all things creation and science. I remember last year our conversation about the conference, and just really wanted to ask one or two questions and sit and enjoy the conversation. I remember being quite overwhelmed by and just mesmerized by what you had to share with us. Tell us about what you'll be speaking about at the Gateway Conference this coming year.
Okay, I have several presentations. Well, one is talking about design and astronomy. I've been giving design a lot of thought for years and years and years, and it's one of those things I think we can recognize readily in biological systems. I'm not so sure we can see it in physical systems so much, but I've identified a number of design implications I think we can find in astronomy. I want to share some of the findings with that. I'm also going to talk about the light travel time problem. This is the question that comes up quite a bit. People are going to frequently ask, well, if the universe is only thousands of years old, how can we see things that are millions of light years away from us? Presumably it would take millions of years for that light to reach us. And I'll be talking about the Galileo affair a bit. That's the whole thing that happened 4 centuries ago with Galileo and the authorities at the time when he was teaching heliocentrism over geocentrism. That wasn't the only thing. There are other things that he was teaching too. And unfortunately, that's been misreported and mischaracterized by many, many people. Suffice to say, what most people think they know about the Galileo affair probably is wrong. And I'm also going to be talking, kind of related to that a little bit, flat Earth. That's become a thing in the last 6 years or so, and something I've been battling quite a bit. Wrote a book about it. I've been speaking about it and blogging and writing web articles about it for 5 years now. So I'm pretty in-depth on that subject.
Very good. So a lot of topics that maybe aren't everyday conversation in most households, but why? Perhaps it is in yours. Why is it important for us to consider these? I'd like to unpack these a little bit more, but let's start with why is it important to consider these issues today?
Well, I think to the Christian, we see the world very differently. We have a different worldview than the non-Christian does. Particularly when it comes to the physical world and biological world. We've got two explanations of how we came here. One's a naturalistic one. We can, for lack of a better term, we can call that evolution, where things arose spontaneously by themselves with no creator, no agent behind it. That would be not just biological evolution, but geological, cosmic, and astronomical, and evolution and many other manifestations of it. And that's in direct conflict with what we know from Scripture. We're told very early on in Scripture, the first chapter, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, with some details given to us. And really, if evolution is true, if natural origins is true, there's absolutely no need for a creator. Creation doesn't fit at all. It's not really compatible, about as compatible as oil and water are. You can shake them up for a while and get them to mix, but not for very long. And so the Christian should not be looking at the world with naturalistic glasses on. And so design is one of those differences. If you're committed to evolution, you wouldn't expect to see design. You would expect to see chaotic and random events out there. So do we see design? And I think it's very, very apparent to me and many others as well that the world around us does appear to be designed. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways is that we Christians, we creationists, we look at the world very differently than secular people do.
So you shared with us four topics that you'll be addressing at the upcoming Gateway Creation Conference. You mentioned design astronomy. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Okay, well, we see that the moon has some very interesting features to it. Its orbit and its size, its mass, I should say, are unique in the solar system. It has the greatest mass when compared to the planet it orbits than any other natural satellites, or if you will, moons orbiting other planets. The ratio between the Earth and the moon is about 81 to 1. That is, the Earth has 81 times the mass of the moon. You may think that's an awful lot, but when you look at the other satellites, natural satellites of the solar system, it's typically thousands, if not millions, to one. The closest it comes is one of the satellites of Saturn, I believe, is 4,000 to one. So there's no comparison there. And also, the orbit of the moon is unique. It orbits in basically the same plane that the Earth orbits the sun. And no other natural satellite in the solar system does that, even though we know of about 200 of them. They all have other orientations, most common being in the equatorial plane of the planets. And when you take these two factors together, the relatively large mass and the unique orbit, uh, this stabilizes the Earth's rotation axis. It's tilted about 23.5 degrees. Everybody knows that's the cause of the seasons. But as you examine it, you'll find that there are little tweaks, little tugs and nudges that are coming from other bodies in the solar system that would widely change that angle between 0 and 90, really, over some period of time, but yet it would still change it. And I think most people would understand readily that would be disastrous for living things. You'd have at some points most of the Earth's surface in simultaneously in the Arctic or Antarctic and the tropics, which would be chaotic. But the moon's unique orbit and mass ratio stabilizes that with only a couple of degrees. Now, I often say in my talk that you're allowed to have a few coincidences, but how many coincidences are you allowed to have before you begin to realize that maybe they're not coincidences at all? And this is just one of the quote unquote coincidences I talk about in my presentation. There are many, many others that strongly suggest design. That's the problem. People who have a secular worldview, a naturalistic worldview, look at these sorts of things and they say, well, it's just the way it turned out. It's just chance. But again, if I flipped a coin 20 times and it came up heads every time, you saw that taking place before your very eyes. After a while, you begin to realize maybe there's something funny going on. Maybe I've got an unfair coin. Maybe I've swept coins on you. It's a double-headed coin or something. And that's what we talk about with design. There are other aspects we'll be talking about. That's just one of them.
Fascinating. Now, if something's off just a little bit, you mentioned that like a region could be both like extremely cold and extremely hot. It's like having snow and 80 degrees all in the same week, like we have here in the Midwest. So,
yeah, or I should say, being in polar and Arctic regions at the same time, which means you would have months of continual sunlight and months of continual darkness. So it wouldn't be necessarily from one day to the next or in the same day, but you would go to very harsh, very cold, sub-zero temperatures for some time, and then you would have tropical conditions for some time. And I don't think there are any plants or animals that can really survive in that kind of environment.
absolutely not. I think we've seen just the frailty of plants and animals just from the horrible freeze that Texas went through this past
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, plants are
You mentioned
designed to plants and animals both are designed for certain range of temperatures and other factors, and ones that are designed for one area, they don't generally do well in other areas.
you mentioned light travel time problem. Can you tell me more about this?
Yeah, again, I mentioned that if the universe is only thousands of years old, how can we see the most distant objects? But Adam had a similar problem, a bigger problem though, because he was made on day 6, and God made the stars on day 4, just 2 days earlier, and the nearest star is outside the solar system is like 4 1/3 light years away. So, did Adam not see any stars for at least 4 years? that the stars slowly wink on from one year to the next over many, many centuries? I don't think so. The reason being is because at the end of the creation week, God pronounced that the creation was very good. In fact, day 4, he said creation there was good. And what this goodness implies or entails is completeness. The things that he made were functioning as they were intended to function. And on the day 4 account, we're given several functions that the astronomical bodies have, primarily the sun and the moon, but also the stars. And they cannot fulfill their functions if they would not have been visible right away. So obviously, we need to get light here in a matter of 2 days or less for Adam to have seen a full range of stars. Otherwise, again, the function would not be there. So I've proposed, and I'll go in more detail in my presentation, but I propose that on day 4, God formed a miraculous sort of thing to bring the light here. He did a similar thing, I think, on day 3. If you look at the count there, plants just didn't materialize instantly out of nothing. God caused them to grow very rapidly out of the ground. That's what the words used there in verses 11 and 12 of Genesis 1 in the day 3 account. It talks about the earth bringing forth these various plants. And my friend Eric Hovind in the book, in the movie he did, Genesis Paradise Lost, he did an excellent job of showing how those plants came forth on day 3, and also how the land animals and birds came about on day 4, 5, and 6. Same sort of thing I think happened on day 4. God rapidly brought the light. It wasn't through a physical process. It wasn't through a natural process, and it wasn't instantaneous either. A lot of mistakes people make about the creation week.
So much more to learn. We have a few more topics just to get a brief insight on, so that to prepare us for the upcoming Gateway Creation Conference here in St. Louis. We're talking with Dr. Danny Faulkner of Answers in Genesis. He'll be one of the speakers at the upcoming Gateway Creation Conference. You're listening to The Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
You're a miracle. You know that, right? A living, breathing, one-of-a-kind miracle. You were created to stand apart, to share your gifts in the service of others, to make an uncommon impact in a common world. And at Concordia University, it's our mission to help you do that, to live uncommon. To learn more about Concordia, go to cuw.edu.
Welcome back to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates. Sarah's away today. She'll be back with us soon. We are talking about the upcoming Gateway Creation Conference. Our guest today, Dr. Danny Faulkner. He's a researcher, author, and speaker for Answers in Genesis and one of the presenters at the upcoming Gateway Creation Conference. And Dr. Faulkner, you shared with us a little bit of some of the topics that you'll be presenting on. And you mentioned, I believe it was earlier, you mentioned, I think, the Galileo affair. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, the way it's usually put forth is that Galileo was minding his own business, was teaching what he'd found that showed that the Earth is not the center of the universe, but it's one of several planets orbiting around the sun. And then religious authorities got all worked up over this, and they began to persecute him, and they tried him for heresy, and it was all very bad. That's the way it's generally portrayed. The situation is a lot more complex than that. Actually, he was not the first to talk about this. A fellow named Nicholas Copernicus had published a book on this about 60 years before Galileo began talking about it. In fact, long before Galileo was born, actually, a year or so before he was born. And so a few years, about 20 years before he was born. And so Galileo was convinced of the heliocentric model, and he began to talk about it more and more. And the other scientists are what really got upset. It was not the theologians. In fact, when he first wrote about it, he had the blessings of the Pope and other church officials. The other scientists began to complain because he was upsetting all of established astronomy at that point, which is true. So it was a scientific squabble, not a religion versus science sort of squabble. He was called up and investigated. They told him, okay, cool, let's stop talking about this. And he did. for a number of years, but then he came back and wanted to address it again after nearly 2 decades. And he wanted to write a book in Italian, and which is different because at that point people generally wrote in Latin for scholarly works, but he wanted to reach a common audience. And he had to get permission from the Pope to publish. He was working within the church. Most people did back then. That's just the way that things worked. Education and so forth was done within the confines of the church. It was far less secular society than we have today. And the Pope gave his agreement. He said, however, you have to represent my position, which is geocentrism, which he agreed to. And in this book, Galileo proceeded to insult the Pope. And the Pope took real umbrage over this. He made the geocentrist and the Pope's position look silly. He even used some inflammatory terms in there. Even in the introduction, he was required to put a disclaimer that said what you're about to read is a fantasy, not reality. And in there he said, as any fool knows, the earth does not move. So what he just did was call anybody who disagreed with him a fool. Galileo was just looking for trouble, it would seem to me. And that infuriated the Pope, and any support he had rapidly evaporated. And that's what resulted in his second trial. He ended his life for last 8 or 10 years in house arrest. He was an old man by the time this all happened. And it wasn't until about the time Galileo came across that writings about heliocentrism, like that of Copernicus, were actually banned. Copernicus's work had been okay to read for 75 years. Nobody got upset about it. So this is usually portrayed as a religion opposing science sort of question. And that's got it completely wrong. It's, again, a squabble between the scientists more than anything. And we're getting the wrong lesson drawn from this. They're trying to say, well, you creationists, you're just like the Roman Catholic Church. You're criticizing real good science here. Well, if you really want to make that comparison, you got to realize what Galileo was doing. He was challenging the status quo. Well, today the status quo is evolution. So if you really want to make this comparison, then we creationists, we're the Galileos, and the evolutionists, they're the Roman Catholic Church. So again, this whole thing has been fouled up. It's been misinterpreted, mischaracterized. So my talk will be kind of clear some of the erroneous things out of the way and really discuss what really happened.
And I think the last item you had mentioned, or the last topic you may be covering, is flat Earth being, I guess, a little more popular in popular news in the last year. What will you be addressing concerning the topic of flat Earth?
Oh, well, this thing blew up 6-7 years ago by using the internet and social media. I've first learned about this whole thing about a little over 5 years ago. It's making vast inroads, has made them into the church. A lot of professing Christians now are sucked into this, and it's just really, really bad. It's making Christians look very foolish, and the arguments are ridiculously bad. I have been investigating it. I've been going to flat Earth conventions. I've been to 3 of them. I've interviewed scads of flat earthers. I have flat earther friends now. I've met at these conventions. I've written on the last count, over 20 articles or blogs that are on the Answers to Genesis website. And in addition to that, I published about a year and a half ago a book about flat Earth as well. It's an insidious problem. It's split churches, it's divided families, and it's a real threat, I think, to the Christian world today. So I'm doing my little part to combat this.
What are you looking forward to most about the upcoming Gateway Creation Conference, Dr. Faulkner?
I think doing it in person. Last year, I was so disappointed. I was an invited speaker, and they had to cancel because of COVID-19. They decided to go ahead and do it online, which I was happy to do. But, it's not the same as actually being there and meeting with people. And I really do enjoy going to these conferences and interacting with people. Have them come up and ask questions. I sometimes have questions that stump me. I get some good ideas from people who do that, and I really miss that interaction. So to me, that's the most important thing that I'm looking forward to, is meeting people and actually being there.
Man, questions to stump the professor. That sounds like a fun challenge.
Yeah, it happens often enough. You might imagine. I was a university professor for years, and many times my students would say, "Well, this may be a dumb question," and I would interrupt and say, "No, I haven't heard any dumb questions yet, but you can try if you want." And usually, when they ask that question, it's just really was kind of a way out there, far out there sort of question. And most of the time, it was actually a very good question. And sometimes I knew the answer, sometimes I didn't. And so I love getting those kind of questions.
Very good, very good. Joining us now is Hannah Klein. She's one of the coordinators for the Gateway Creation Conference. Hannah, thanks so much for joining us on the Coffee Hour.
Thank you for having me on. In addition to Dr. Faulkner from Answers in Genesis that you've just been listening to, we're excited to also welcome Robert Hill, astronomer from Bob Jones University. He's going to be talking about arguments against the Big Bang model, both the good arguments and the not so good arguments. And then we'll have Russ Humphreys, physicist formerly from Sandia National Labs, and now he's with Logos Research Associates. He'll be presenting his work on developing a creationist cosmology. And Doug Smith, a PhD student specializing in Hebrew and Old Testament studies, will be talking about the Hebrew of Genesis chapter 1, specifically the firmament in day 2 of Genesis 1. So our conference theme this year is taken from Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the expanse shows his handiwork. And in addition to these presentations, we'll have panel discussions and maybe, if the weather cooperates, maybe a stargazing session for people who are willing to stay late. The conference is going to be held June 24th and 25th at the Rock Church, St. Louis in Ballwin, Missouri, and live stream access is also available. It's our prayer that this conference will be an encouragement to everyone who can come and that it will serve to make much of Jesus. So for more information about the Gateway Creation Conference, visit our website at creationconf.com, creationconf.com.
And the dates for the conference this year, taking place both in person and online. What are the dates again?
June 24 and 25.
Very good. June 24 and 25. You can find more information at creationconf.com, creationconf.com. Outstanding. Looking forward to a great conference and just a great lineup of speakers. Why, Hannah, from your perspective, why is it important for us to continue to have conferences like this, the Gateway Creation Conference?
Well, God created the universe to show us something about what he's like, among other things. Romans 1:20 talks about that. And so as we study the things that God has made, we can learn more about him, and it can help us to appreciate his grandeur and majesty.
Very good. Very good. The Creation Conference, creationconf.com. Our guest today, Dr. Danny Faulkner. He's a researcher, author, and speaker for Answers in Genesis and one of the presenters at the upcoming Creation Conference. Dr. Faulkner, thanks so much for joining us on the Coffee Hour today.
You're very welcome.
And Hannah Klein, one of the coordinators for the Gateway Creation Conference. Hannah, thanks so much for being our guest on the Coffee Hour.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@kfuo.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.